Now in this section we will continue with some of the basic commands. We'll see how to connect the router, and then we'll see the command line of the router by using a Cisco router here. So to get into the command line, as we discussed in our previous section, you need to do something called console connection. Okay, so console connection is something you need to do. So if you remember, we discussed that console connection is we are going to use one console cable. On the one side you have an RJ45 which we are going to connect on the console port, and the other end you have some DB9 port or the 9-pin port which you find on the computer. You need to connect this cable on that, and we call this as a console connection. So the basic prerequisite, if you want to get into the command line of the router, you must have a console connection initially. Okay, so that's what we are going to do here. Now once we have this console connection, so the next step is you need to use some emulation tools. We call them as terminal emulation tools, which will allow you to see the command line of the program. And in this command line we need to tell which port we are connecting and what's the device. And once you define that parameters, now these programs will allow you to see the command line of the router. So I got some couple of snapshots of some of the emulation tools. Like if you're using some Windows XP operating system or any other operating system, not in Windows 7, Windows 8, you don't find this hyperterminal by default. But if you're using some Windows XP operating system, you will find this hyperterminal application comes by default. Now to do that, we need to go to Start, Programs, Accessories, and then Communication, and then we can go to hyperterminal. And once you open that particular connection, it will ask you the name for the connection, and then we need to tell which port we are using here. On the computer, if you have COM1, COM2, typically we call them as COM ports. So mostly you will have one COM port. If you have more than one, you can try COM1, and then we have to use an option called Restore Defaults. These are the actual port settings for the console connection, which we did. Now here you need to tell which port you are connecting. So on the computer we are going to connect on COM1. Now this particular program is going to show you the output of the device, whatever you are connecting on that particular COM1 port. Now once you restore defaults and you click OK, you will be able to see some screen, something like this. Now this screen is going to show you the command line of the router. Okay, now this screen, whatever you type here, it's going to exactly execute the same thing on the router via the console cable, whatever we are using here. Now this is a snapshot of one of the default application which we use in Windows XP machines, hyperterminal. And to access that, we need to go step by step, Start, Programs, Access, Hyperterminal. Or if you want to use shortcut, we can go to Run, and we can type something called hypertrm. That's a shortcut which I can use to get into the command line directly from the Run prompt. Now if you're connecting the routers, then this is something you must know. Apart from that, we can also use something called an open source program called PuTTY. I can use this router where I can connect my router to the COM port, like the console connection, and then we need to tell the serial connection here with a speed of 9600, whatever the port speed, and you have to tell which port you are connecting. I'm connecting on COM port, and that is COM1. Once you do this, and then when you click on Open, you'll find the command line on a separate window here. The window looks like this, and you can see the command line more similar to your hyperterminal screen. So we have a different options, whether we can use hyperterminal, which is one of the most common way of accessing the console connections, or we can use PuTTY. Even you have some Teraterm, SecureCRT, some other programs you'll find. Okay, so most commonly I prefer either hyperterminal or PuTTY softwares. Okay, so in the screenshot wise, this is how they look. Okay, so let's try to get into the router command line. So here I'm not connecting a real router here. Okay, so if you're connecting a real router, this is how we need to do. So I'm going to show you the similar kind of thing on a simulation tool called Packet Tracer Cisco, where I'm going to open up this Cisco Packet Tracer tool, and I'm going to do the similar kind of thing. It's a one kind of emulation where, as I said, on the left side of the bottom you will find some routers here. We can drag and drop any one router. Just drag and drop any one router here, And then if you want to have a console connection, we can take a computer, and then when you click on this cable, you'll find a console cable, connect to console port, and it goes on my RS-232. Now this RS-232 is exactly the same port what you'll find on, it's actually a console port, DB9 port. This RS-232, whatever we say, this port is actually DB9 port, 9-pin port on the computer, and this is a console port. Now if you want to see the command line, generally we need to go to desktop, and then we can run some option here, terminal. Now this is like a virtual, it's going to look the same way. Now you can see the router has booted. You can see all this output here. Let me just power off the device. And if you want to do the same thing like powering off the device, just go to click on the router, and here you'll find the power off button, more similar to your router here. And you can see there's nothing, you don't see anything here. And once you power on, let me just power on the router here, and you can see the router starts the booting process here. So it's kind of one kind of simulation where when you connect the real routers, we generally connect in this way, the one which I have showed you in your normal devices. Okay, so we do some console connection here, and then we are going to use some hyperterminal access for the console access hyperterminal tool, or you can use PuTTY softwares. Okay, so most of the time here in the labs I'm going to show you on the simulation tool, because so that it makes a little bit easy for you to simulate the labs as if you are connecting on the real routers. But at the end there won't be much difference when you are connecting a router. When you're connecting a router and getting into the command line, and this is just like a console screen, whatever the screen you see, it is exactly equivalent to your console screen. You can see the router is booting, and it has finished the booting process. Now the booting process is much faster on this program here on the Cisco Packet Tracer. Let me just highlight some of the outputs while the router is booting. Now you can see this is a bootstrap, or the BIOS bootstrap version on the ROM version we can say, and you can see this decompressing the image. It is going to copy the image from the flash into the RAM, and then it is decompressing it, and some restriction message from Cisco, the same output you'll find on the real routers, exact. And I'm using some 2600 router here, and the iOS version is 12.2. Now the current iOS version from Cisco is 12.3, 12.4. After that there is something called 15.x iOS versions. So 15.1, 2, 3, 4 is already released, announced. So probably you'll find these are the latest iOS versions from Cisco, 15.iOS versions. And then if you just come down, I'm using 2621 platform, and this is my main memory. So somewhere around 256 MB I can say. That is a main memory RAM capability of my router. And then here if you come down a little bit, you'll find this router is supporting 2 fast Ethernet ports, and then 32 KB of NVRAM capacity, and then 64 MB of flash memory. And after that you'll see some modes. Now from here onwards your actual command line starts. Okay, now you can see everything here. From here onwards we can start with the commands and with the different types of commands. That's something we'll see in our next video, like what are the different types of commands you'll see. Now all the commands are divided into different modes, we call it them as. We'll see these modes more in detail in our next section.